were in high IQ demanding professions compared to, again, a much lower base rate in the population. So these were sufferers, and I believe these are actually patients, not their relatives. So the evidence that Ashkenazi disease Jesus boosts intelligence is, I would say at present, quite iffy. On the other hand, it is a highly testable hypothesis, and all you have to do is compare the IQ of siblings where one of them possesses the deleterious gene, namely as a carrier, another one lacks the deleterious gene, and the prediction is that carriers should have higher IQ. Now, it would be straightforward to do, and I think by the criterion that a good scientific theory is one that offers instructions as to how to prove it false, by that criterion, this claim, even though it's crucial and is yet only sketchily supported, is a good example of falsifiable science. So in sum, I think there's reasonable prima facie evidence for each of these 7 component hypotheses. However, all of them would have to be true for the overall CHH theory to be true. Some are circumstantial, and the most important hypothesis, namely the IQ boost of disease genes, has the least evidence. Nonetheless, the theory is highly testable and therefore deserves to be taken seriously. Well, this is the question that I think occurs to most people when they hear about this study. As everyone's grandmother said, so tell me, is this good for the Jews or is it not so good for the Jews? Well, one interpretation is that it is good for the Jews, that Jewish achievement is not itself controversial or hidden or a secret. It's obvious to anyone with eyes. The only issue in the population at large is what is its cause. The idea that Jews are so successful because on average they have a higher representation of intelligent people is a more palatable hypothesis than most of the other ones that are out there, such as that the concentration of Jews in influential positions is a result of some conspiracy or as a result of traits like ruthlessness, aggression, and so on. And indeed, this kind of analysis could be part of an antidote to the widespread hatred of middlemen minorities in general that throughout the world, not just in the case of the Jews, but other minorities that have specialized in money lending, being merchants and so on, such as the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, the overseas Chinese in Malaysia, the Indians in Africa, and so on, have also been targets of persecution, partly because the middleman niche is one that's, I think, rather difficult for the untutored mind to grasp. Middlemen, moneylenders, and retailers don't make stuff. They're not like farmers or craftsmen where they cause useful things to come into being. All they do is they move them around in space in the case of retailing, or move them around in time in the case of money lending. To many peoples, this has, as Hayek put it, the stench of sorcery, and middlemen have commonly been singled out as parasites and bloodsuckers, and have therefore been the target of expulsions and genocides. Perhaps a more sophisticated understanding of what it takes to be a middleman and of the necessity of middlemen in world economies could be an antidote to this widespread hatred. And indeed, some public Jewish figures, such as Abe Foxman, head of the Anti-Defamation League, was quoted in the article in New York Magazine as having no problem at all with this finding. On the other hand, it's not so innocuous either. I think no one is terribly offended by the idea that they come from a group with a higher than average intelligence, but what if you start looking at personality traits? We know that personality traits can be measured, that within a population they're highly heritable, although again that doesn't say that differences between populations are necessarily heritable. We know that there are small statistical differences between ethnic groups, again not necessarily genetic, but the question could be asked, was there selection for Ashkenazi personality traits that were conducive to success in financial, managerial, and entrepreneurial niches? And I'll leave it to your imagination what those traits might be. And indeed, how would a finding like this, I actually doubt that this will happen, but if it were to happen, how would this be interpreted, for example, in Cairo or Kuala Lumpur or the suburbs of Paris? Also, it opens the door to a possible emphasis of Ashkenazi Sephardic differences. The article by CHH was about Ashkenazi intelligence, and I asked Cochrane about what the predictions are with regard to the Sephardim, and he said that probably a similar story would apply, although not as cleanly, not with as much strength. And of course, this has implications for the status of civil harmony in Israel, for example. And of course, once you open the door to any group differences being examined in terms of their possible genetic causes, you get to far more politically fraught issues, such as the source of the difference in IQ scores between African American and European American populations. And so, not surprisingly, there have also been some denunciations of the CHH study. It was been called bad science, as having no positive impact, and I'd call the study bullshit if I didn't feel its idea were so insulting. All of them you can find in the New York Magazine article. I think this is part of a larger repugnance among intellectuals to any genetic explanation of anything. I've written a book on this topic, The Blank Slate, The Modern Denial of Human Nature, how the idea that any aspect of human talent or temperament has any biological basis has often been seen as politically and morally and emotionally incendiary in most of the 20th century. And in the book, I tried to analyze how one can sensitively deal with discoveries of a biological basis of human personality and intelligence, including possible discoveries about the genetics of group differences. I think it's safe to say that the current approach, or at least the approach in recent decades, was to deny the existence of intelligence. I mentioned the mismeasure of man as the foremost example. To deny the existence of genetically distinct human groups. There is a widespread myth that there is no such thing as race whatsoever, that it's purely a social construction, and to call the people who don't do this Nazis. But on the other hand, there is a quotation, I don't know who's responsible for it. Reality is what refuses to go away when I stop believing in it. That in a way, it doesn't matter what our emotional reaction is to various findings. They are what they are, and they're going to stay that way regardless of whether we think that it's good for the Jews or good for anything else or not. The truth cannot be anti-Semitic. It's crucial, I think, in thinking through these issues that we distinguish between the concept of fairness and the concept of sameness. When the Declaration of Independence said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, it was not saying we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are clones. Rather, a commitment to political equality is a policy of prohibiting discrimination against individuals based on the statistical averages of certain groups that they belong to, such as their race, ethnicity, or sex. And by aiming policies at individuals rather than groups, it doesn't matter what the statistics of the groups do or don't turn out to be in terms of your implementation of political equality. Well, granted that it makes no sense to legislate a priori what an empirical result ought to be, one could still suggest that perhaps we shouldn't go there, that perhaps this question shouldn't be asked if we're not prepared to accept some of the possible answers. And one could imagine that restricting this kind of research because of its possible socially harmful consequences, as we do, say, in the case of protection of human subjects in biomedical research, safeguards of patient confidentiality, and the moratorium on recombinant DNA research in the 1970s. The problem is, the reason that I don't think we can do that is, first of all, that the perceived danger in this case does not come from the activity of the research, that is, who will be harmed by the actual conduct of the research, but by the content of the ideas. And that makes any kind of prohibition, I think, quite dangerous. Ideas are connected to other ideas, and any restriction based on content could distort both freedom of inquiry and indeed the entire intellectual landscape. And history is rife with examples where empirical claims were thought to have great moral import. Contrary ideas were suppressed or punished, and science and indeed humankind suffered as a result. And indeed, there are many positive reasons for studying genes in groups. Genomic medicine is the most obvious one. genetic diseases are horrible things. That's why there has been so much attention to them, both in Ashkenazim and other groups. And in understanding the cause and possibly cure of a disease, one has to understand all of its causes and consequences, including population concentration and possible effects on the central nervous system. Genetic studies have been a tremendously exciting source of information on Jewish history and prehistory. It's been results of genetic studies that have shown that there indeed is a common root in the Middle East of most extant Jewish populations, and that there's a common Y chromosome haplotype, that is pattern of adjacent genes, among the Kohanim, dating back to the period of probably the Second Temple, and therefore giving genetic support to the idea that priestly status among Jewish men was conferred along the paternal line. And there are many other absolutely fascinating discoveries about Jewish history that we can expect thanks to these techniques. It also helps us with the history of underdocumented regions, Africa, the Americas, Oceania, Australia, where because of the absence of written records, we're enormously ignorant of how the people got there and when and under what circumstances. The deep prehistory of all of humankind before there were written records. How did the Europeans get to Europe? How did the Japanese get to Japan? Why do we find peoples the way they are? How did languages diversify, which are opened up to us by a study of genetic differences among groups? Genealogy is another vista that has been opened up by genetic studies. Indeed, some of the most avid consumers of genomic analyses are African Americans who, pursuing the new roots, will have their DNA sequenced in order to trace their ancestry back to particular regions in Africa, a long sought-after substitute to the tragic obliteration of any historical record of their genealogies. And also, of course, doing studies of genetic similarities and differences among groups could disprove some claims about invidious group differences and therefore help rather than hurt public perceptions of differences between groups. So I'm going to end with some final thoughts on the genomic revolution, what has been wrought by the publication of the sequence of the human genome in 2000 and its various consequences. There's been an enormous amount of hand-wringing over what we can expect from the revolution in human genomics. It was the impetus for example, for the Presidential Council on Bioethics, in which the two most commonly cited fears are the possibility of cloning and the possibility of human genetic enhancement, so-called designer babies, putting genes for intelligence, musical, or athletic ability into your unborn child. I actually think these fears are misbegotten. Clones are just twins, and I think once people realize what cloning is, namely it's a way of having an identical twin as your child instead of some other child that you might have had, and it's not a form of resurrection, I don't think that many people would opt for it, even if it were available. And indeed, if CHH are right, genetic enhancement will be extraordinarily difficult, and I predict that it will not happen in our lifetimes, if ever, simply because genes with large effects on IQ are also likely to have deleterious side effects. We know that we have reason to believe there are genes that enhance intelligence. For example, the torsion dystonia gene, if you put it in your child, it would give the child a 10-point IQ boost. It would also give your child a 10% chance of spending his or her life in a wheelchair with uncontrollable muscle spasms. I think that's the kind of choice that parents are going to have in genetic enhancement, and I think that will probably stop it in its tracks. I think what the most fraught outcome of the genomic revolution is going to be is not cloning and not designer babies, but rather the power to uncover possible genetic and evolutionary causes of some group differences, and that the current intellectual world is ill-prepared to deal with this prospect. Thank you very much.